While the beautifully modded PC version of PES 2021 will always hold a special place in my heart with the way it was able to realistically capture the intricacies of the beautiful game, especially with full manual controls, eFootball 2022's version 1 release surprised me by bringing enough core gameplay improvements to the broken 0.9 version in terms of passing, dribbling, and shooting to become my most played game since it was released back in April. There is an unmistakable fluidity to eFootball's flow, despite having a much more grounded and slower pace than PES. There is fluidity in the way your player chests down a ball while keeping his forward motion before taking a shot. I'm talking about things as simple as being able to receive a ball, then smoothly yet realistically make a quick turn and sprint into the opposite direction, then seeing the other team's sprinting players struggle to shift their momentum to keep up with me, or being able to navigate tight corridors by dribbling your way out of them with robust dribbling mechanics that allow you to make the best out of your player and the surrounding opposition shifts in momentum without using skill moves. These improvements in player inertia have categorically addressed what was clearly the weakest part of PES 2021's gameplay, which was dribbling. Gone are the robotic running animations from PES 2021, with plenty more small new animations introduced here and there. Like Trent and Van Dijk looking at each other to set up a timely offside trap for Salah, which is why this time he looks at the last defenders to properly time his run and avoid drifting into offside. And these little head turns can actually impact responsiveness. Here the defender is looking for strikers behind him and reacts late to the ball when he sees it. That said, some of the fancier acrobatic finishing animations from PES 2021 are missing or very difficult to trigger in eFootball. And as an example of 1 step forward and 2 steps backwards, the enhanced inertia-based dribbling seems to have led to broken keeper exits, which was the best improvement in PES 2021. That said, keepers are just as good when they stick to their lines. The 1.0 version also came with the previously promised individual instructions, which brought back tactical options like attacking fullbacks bombing down the wings, along with improved off-ball player movements into the box. Then there's the ability to put in a little extra care into your crosses to whip them onto your striker's head using the stunning modifier. And I love the way your striker realistically reacts to your cross a little faster than its mark, which makes all the difference in the box. The slower and more deliberate pace of eFootball is a breath of fresh air that allows you to really consider the options around you, and I found that I no longer needed to drop the speed to -1 like I used to do in PES when using manual controls against Legend AI. From a visual standpoint, while daytime matches are a significant upgrade over vanilla PES, it's nothing really when compared to modded daytime PES on PC, and despite shifting to Unreal Engine, it lacks any of the beautiful modded weather effects in PES. I mean, at this point, playing in the rain feels like a distant PES memory. And apparently, this better looking daytime mode in eFootball impacts performance so much that all online matches are actually played exclusively at night to minimize lag. And even then, the game is so poorly optimized that I had to switch to Juventus as my home team when I noticed their stadium performed better than others. Thankfully, nighttime match lighting is also a clear improvement over vanilla PES, but still nowhere as lifelike as modded PES games at night. That all said, eFootball sometimes behaves like a broken game, especially when it comes to having the cursor switch to the correct player, which by the way, is not an issue limited to manual passing. Then there's the lack of machine-learned animations, which leads to a frustrating dip in responsiveness even offline. But it's worse online, when you find yourself waiting too long for the animation to transition based on your input. Speaking of online, we'll talk about the rampant cheaters on both PC and yes, PS4, who void games when they know they can't win, and you end up without your win being counted, or sometimes worse, especially with Division 1 players, who use hacks that can convert any score to a 3-0 loss for you, which is absolutely devastating. And while eFootball's lack of modes makes it feel more like a demo than a free full game, the appropriately named Dream Team mode is actually a very welcome departure from the tedious MyClub, and we'll talk about why I think it's a slam dunk win for Konami. And ultimately, at its best, the new eFootball plays the smoothest and most satisfying football game I've ever played, especially when you learn to manually pass into your player's momentum. And while there's plenty of room for improvement, it's good enough for me to recognize this gameplay direction as a valid future for the series. So I'm going to start with ball physics, which lie at the heart of every single interaction in a football game. Now, PES 2021 had quite possibly the best ball physics in any football game ever. You can see it in the correct way it skids off players' heads. You can also see it in the way the ball spins when it deflects off the player's feet. And more importantly, the way it bounces into the direction of the spin when it lands. And this is something I just can't stop noticing when I'm playing PES. Now when eFootball 0.9 came out, ball physics were in a horrendous state. The ball just moved in straight lines and bounced straight regardless of how it was spinning. And look how a full-powered shot by Aubameyang very weakly bounces off Maguire's head in the 0.9 version. So Konami postponed the game's release for 6 months, and in the 1.0 version, I was actually surprised by the huge improvement in ball physics in the full release. Now, is it anywhere as good as ball bounce physics of PES 2021? Not really, no. That said, it is good enough to make a realistic difference in the outcome of your plays, like keeping the ball in play by spinning it away from the sideline, or realistically swerving a beautiful outside curler pass towards your attacking fullback. Accurate bounce physics can mean conceding a corner kick instead of a throw-in, or the other way around with the ball spinning away from the goal line. And it makes a difference when you fail to read the direction of an expected bounce that can take the ball away from your player chasing it. And even without bouncing, the ball's trajectory in the air will be influenced by the spin, like how it dips faster when it acquires a downward spin mid-flight. But again, it's not as good as the way the ball's spin affects its trajectory through the air in PES. Like here the ball momentarily swerves out for a goal kick, then swerves back into the pitch. And unfortunately, and more importantly, the same can be said about the shooting physics in eFootball, which still feels unnatural compared to PES. You see, in PES, the reason you want to take a dropping ball on a volley is so you can see it dip into the goal, and it just feels right when you properly time your volley and it dips into the net. And you can clearly see how the ball acquires this downward spin in the replay. This leads to a whole minigame where you try to time your shot to catch the ball while it's dropping, and I will never miss out on the opportunity to hit a dropping ball in PES, because when you get it right, it looks spectacular. And that's even if it's just a small bounce, but you happen to take the shot at the right moment. But in eFootball, these unique shooting physics were completely absent, regardless of how good the shooter is, and it has been that way since the 0.9 release. It's just very sad because the last 10 years of PES games would produce a looping trajectory when you hit a dropping ball, but it just no longer happens in eFootball. Not even when you use the stunning modifier to take the volley. That all said, shooting physics in the full release are still a huge improvement over the 0.9 release, especially when it comes to shooting a rebounding ball moving away from the goal before taking the shot, even with players who have mediocre shooting attributes, and even when you're taking the shot with a weaker foot. This explosiveness when shooting a rebounding ball was completely lacking in the 0.9 version, which had the most dreadful and flat rebound shooting physics that completely ruined the game. And it came in stark contrast to PES 2021, where rebound shooting physics were just incredible and they made a large source of most my full manual long-range goals, which was why I never missed out on directly shooting any rebounding ball in PES. But yeah, they fixed the rebound shooting physics in the 1.0 spring release, and I'm back to scoring these lovely rebounding long ranges in eFootball, even though, as I said, they won't acquire a dipping trajectory even if they're dropping towards the shooter. But when you're not shooting a rebounding ball, there is a palpable lack of explosiveness, and the only way to reliably get that explosiveness of shots we used to have in PES is to release R2, then hold both R2 and shoot together to trigger a stunning shot. Now you can still score long rangers without using the stunning modifier, but they tend to glide a lot slower through the air and lack that realistic explosiveness of stunning shots, like the air gets a little thicker as the ball glides through it. Now triggering a stunning shot makes your player take his time to reposition himself to better optimize his boot's contact with the ball when he takes the shot, so it's best to create space before triggering it. Like you see that little animation where Ronaldo adjusts his footing to prepare for the shot? Stunning shots existed in PES, but they were contextual, happening only when you had the extra space to pull it off. Now in eFootball, if you're already running at the ball, the extra steps get incorporated into your run, so you won't need any extra space for a stunning shot. Since the physics of rebound vanilla shots are already good in eFootball, I wouldn't use the stunning modifier for rebound manual shots because that might cause your player to take an extra touch to adjust his footing, and this extra touch can mess up with your initial manual aim, which by the way, you can't change after putting it in. It also makes the game's responsiveness issues worse than they already are. Like look here how far the ball is by the time the full stunning shot instruction has been fully received, and yet Thiago needs to take an extra touch which he didn't have the time or room to take. So you really need to plan your stunning shots long before the ball approaches you, which I find to be realistic. You can't expect to pull it off in a crowded box or with defenders closing down on you. Now while I understand and admire how a stunning shot won't have a guaranteed level trajectory even if you make enough space and properly aim and power your stunning shot, and I like how it comes out bad if you take it in an awkward position with a weaker foot. But then I don't like how the stunning modifier won't make your player use his dominant foot even when it's easy to. And I don't like how it doesn't make your player come across the ball the correct way. Like here, I'm expecting Trent to come across the ball with the outside of his boot, so it spins outside in towards the goal. But instead, he strikes it with the inside of his boot and it swerves away from the goal. This might be related to the fact the ball generally spins the wrong way in relation to how the shot is taken. Like Modric comes across the ball here, but it spins vertically. Finally, manual finesse shooting aiming is just as difficult and broken as it was in PES, even with players who will always cut inside and curl balls in like Salah. And yes, I die a little inside every time I see a fully assisted player online curl an assisted finesse shot past my goalie. It really hurts to watch and requires zero skill on their end. So to sum up my impression of shooting physics in eFootball, the broken rebound shooting physics in 0.9 have been fixed in 1.0, but shooting a dropping ball still won't produce a looping shot like it did in PES. Manual finesse shot aiming is way more difficult than it needs to be. Regular shooting in eFootball lacks some of its explosiveness in PES, but the stunning modifier is a realistic way of getting this explosiveness back by taking extra time to optimize the player's footing. But it won't make him use his dominant foot, and it disappointingly won't optimize the way he swerves the ball. And it's actually the same issue with stunning crosses, which I actually love. Like, I understand I need to first reposition my player to be able to cross using his dominant foot. And if the ball is already on the weaker foot side, a player with good dexterity will do a decent job crossing with that foot. But many times, like here, applying the stunning modifier won't force Trent to position himself to the left side of the ball, and instead he awkwardly moves to its right and takes it with his weaker left foot, and it comes out weak and floaty without a swerve, which is the exact opposite of what stunning crosses are all the time with their powerful pace and dipping trajectories, making it a lot easier to bounce them off players. And even before Konami patched the game so we'd see the purple bar with manual stunning crosses, you can still identify a stunning cross with the same little readjustment steps the player takes, followed by the powerful and dipping trajectory of the cross. Like here, you'll see a normal L1 early cross, and it's a smooth animation transition from dribbling to crossing, and it comes out kinda slow and floaty, but then when Trent activates the stunning cross modifier before Konami made it visible with manual controls, you'll see him take a few small steps before delivering a cross with much more pace and dip. I must say, I'm not a fan of the slow and floaty nature of normal crossing in eFootball. It feels like they nerfed regular crossing so that stunning crosses, even with the player's weaker foot, would be more menacing compared to them. If your player is jumping from a stationary position, a regular cross won't generate any power on the header, so unless your player is attacking that normal cross with a lot of momentum in his jump, it is always a better idea to go for a header pass to another player with these regular crosses, because you won't be able to get enough power on a header with a regular cross without this forward momentum. He's had a shot! Now in PES, you were still able to make these powerful swerving crosses that beautifully bounce off your striker's head, but they were mostly contextual with little control on your end. Also, in PES, the header physics were so good that even with a high and slow cross, players were still able to generate enough pace on the header to get it past the keeper. But I'm happy to report that the same can be done with proper manual aiming in eFootball. As for the actual physics of heading in eFootball, sometimes they look incredible and even better than in PES. But then other times, it looks a little awkward. Like, look at how the ball's speed and trajectory doesn't seem like a genuine reflection of Salah's head. And compare it to the somewhat similar PES goal, where the ball does seem to genuinely bounce off Benzema's head in a similar yet more realistic trajectory. Now, while I was able to score lovely headers in eFootball off normal crosses, especially if you're heading the ball into the direction it's coming from, I found that you really need that stunning cross pace to bounce a header off a player with poor heading stats.
Into some space, goes in for the header!
Now, even though there's a wealth of lovely animations to help convert many of those manual crosses, including animations used to get a ball landing slightly behind your player, my biggest issue with crosses in eFootball is with the way players deal with a ball landing behind them or at waist height. Like here, even offline, the ball arrives at waist level to Benzema, who has an acrobatic finish trait, and the shooting command has been fully received well in advance, but it's as if players in eFootball can no longer pull off bicycle kicks. And I do not remember this being an issue in the 0.9 release, where I actually scored a few of those. I mean, the best thing about manual crossing is that the ball can land anywhere, and in PES, it invited players to acrobatically flip a ball that lands behind them directly towards the goal. And they do the same if it falls at waist level to an acrobatic player. And if a ball is falling short of a decent header, a player with a trait will move towards it and flip it into the goal. But in eFootball, players will simply try to jump backwards and hit a very weak header instead, where in PES, the player will backtrack then flip the ball into the net. And no, of course it didn't always result in a goal, but it's like the animation no longer exists in eFootball and has been replaced by this meaningless header while jumping backwards. Again, you see Cruz in PES receiving a cross behind him, so he moves towards the ball to flip it into the net. But in eFootball, Ronaldo seems to be incapable of flipping this volley towards the goal, even on his dominant foot, and needs to take a touch first. The only time I've been able to trigger an acrobatic finish in eFootball was with very high and slow balls, and it's oftentimes the result of an aerial battle or a deflection, with the ball bouncing between players and slowly landing just behind your striker. Or sometimes, it's a high deflection off the post or a rebound off a keeper save that triggers it. I mean, I like how you need to stop your player short of reaching the ball to trigger that finish, but having it exclusively triggered with high and slow balls is very disappointing. I mean, crossing with full manual controls was already very difficult when you're just learning FUMA. Part of the payoff in PES was the fact some of these manual crosses will inadvertently land slightly behind the player or in front of him, triggering a beautiful acrobatic finish in players who have the trait. There are still several advantages to the much more difficult manual passing and crossing that are specific to eFootball.
He's left his man. Big chance!
As you know, manual passing can be powered and aimed anywhere on the pitch to exploit open spaces behind defenders, which is why it yanks the receiver off his path, pulling him towards the manual pass away from his marks. And that's how it worked in every single PES, unlike assisted passing, which is almost always powered enough to reach the receiver's feet. So for instance, here Ronaldo gets pulled away from his mark with the shorter manual pass, but what's unique to eFootball is that players, including defenders, have a more realistic weight and momentum attached to their movement, so it's a lot easier to beat defenders by taking advantage of sudden shifts in direction. And that's what happens when you manually cross in eFootball. Right before the cross is taken, Ronaldo is actually sandwiched between two defenders, but when I manually power it a little too short, he immediately changes direction while the defenders struggle to pause their momentum and turn to face him. And it's the same thing here. Look at how far Vini is behind the defender who's moving towards his own goal, and then the manual cross actually gets powered in front of the defender, but his momentum continues to carry him past this point while Vini immediately darts towards the ball to finish it off. Compare that to PES, where the only way to score a goal like that is if your striker is already closer to the ball when the cross is made. And I actually prefer the new dynamic in the box, because in real life, it's the striker who responds faster to the cross, while the defender is usually preoccupied by the striker. And it's primarily why I prefer to use the dash tactic for corner kicks, especially with teams that don't use zonal marking. So yeah, eFootball's player momentum plays a huge role in everything, but to sum up my impression of crossing in eFootball, regular crosses are usually too floaty to be effective, unless a good header of the ball has forward momentum on his jump, and it's better to pass normal lofty crosses and save going for the target for stunning crosses, which really are the only type of crossing you should always attempt to pull off. Players are much less likely to pull off acrobatic finishes in response to a misplaced manual cross compared to PES, but manual crossing does pull strikers more effectively to meet the ball thanks to eFootball's longer momentum shifts in all players including defenders. And once you better understand these momentum shifts, manual passing in eFootball is probably the most satisfying I've seen in a football game, especially given the more grounded and slower overall build-up pace in this year's game, which is complemented by the improved off-ball player positioning in and around the penalty box. And just like with crossing, you get the advantage of pulling in your players towards your short manual passes while their marks take longer to shift their momentum. Like watch as Hazard gets quickly yanked off his forward run while his mark takes longer to figure it out. One big advantage of manual passing in eFootball that immediately stood out to me was the slower filling power bar, which made it much easier to perform very short taps of the ball into a running player's path.
Look at the space here.
That was a big issue for me in PES, where I was almost unable to perform short manual passes without overshooting them past my target, thanks to the power bar that fills up in no time without assistance to correct for it. The fluidity of passing in eFootball is also thanks to the enhanced player animations, which provide a lot more versatility when it comes to the timing and aim of your manual passes. Like check out this nifty short L1 pass by Bale, which sets him up nicely to quickly receive it again. But it's not only about the delicate first touch passes. The animations also help your player quickly yet elegantly get it out of their feet after receiving it, and you're able to feel a difference in responsiveness with fancier passers of the ball. I mean, sometimes the passing animations are a little too over the top in a very unnecessary way, but being able to quickly release a ball really makes all the difference in your plays.
Oh, super ball. There's the hit.
And no, you don't need the stunning modifier to trigger beautiful outside curler passes. The game actually does a good job forcing outside curler manual passes on the dominant foot with players who have the trait when delivering passes into the box. And it's not just the plethora of passing animations that contribute to the fluidity of passing in eFootball, it's also the animations players use to receive the ball, setting them up to smoothly pass it on. That said, there still aren't enough animations to transition into receiving the ball at any height and during any part of the player's animation cycle, and it often leads to the ball just smacking your player and bouncing off of him, or the player just ignores the ball altogether. Honestly, in this day and age, you can't expect a developer to motion capture every possible animation transition for every possible part of every animation cycle. It's just not possible, which is why companies like EA have shifted to using machine learning so an AI algorithm would handle this and generate enough transitions so we don't see players ignoring balls because they don't have an animation to receive it. And the sooner Konami realizes the importance of machine learning to avoid this problem, the more responsive this game will be to your input. And you know it's bad when you see it happening to the AI itself. And it's not specific to manual passing either. I've seen it happen to my assisted opponents online, even though the cursor switches to the player. Speaking of which, unfortunately, eFootball does a horrible job with player switching, even with assisted passing, where the cursor can switch to the wrong player further away from the ball. But when it comes to letting the engine figure out who you're manually passing to, it starts feeling more like a miserable nightmare. This is not new to the 1.0 version. Player switching was an already dreadful affair in the 0.9 version. I mean, the cursor wouldn't shift to your target even with the ball literally passing through him. I'm talking here about simple manual passes in the back. And the 1.0 game still has no idea which player is closest to the ball. Like over here, the ball misses Benzema, but instead of switching to Vini, it actually switches to the fullback, who is not even in the frame. It's hilarious how bad the player switching is, no matter how obvious my actual target is. Like here, I'm clearly targeting Ronaldo, but the engine actually slows him down and switches the cursor to the much further away player who has a defender ahead of him. And the exact same issue here. The engine switches the cursor to my further player behind the defender. I mean, manual passing is hard enough without the game sabotaging simple passes with broken player switching. And it is incredibly frustrating because it's not something I have control over, and it's entirely independent of player stats. Like Trent is trying to pass to Cruz, but somehow the game thinks Ronaldo, who's all the way in the back, is who I wanted to pass the ball to. Again, I'm passing to Thiago, but it selects Hazard, not even Robbo, who's much closer. It doesn't even provide Thiago as an option to switch to. That's how bad things are. I don't get it. I mean, both Salah and Ronaldo are looking at Coutinho, but the engine chooses to switch to Ronaldo even though the pass is clearly way closer to Salah. It's just bad coding. Like, I've already powered and aimed my pass here. The engine should know exactly where the ball will land up, and I'm clearly passing to Ziyech here. And he's even pointing where he wants it. But the game doesn't slow him down and switches to Salah, who's behind a defender. And if you think this is happening because I'm overpowering my passes, check this one out. I just tapped pass and you can barely see a slither of a pass bar filled, and it still switches to Salah instead of Coutinho. And then of course, there's the many times where I'm clearly passing into a space for my sprinting attacking fullback, but it actually slows him down, keeps the cursor on my passer, and doesn't even present Trent as an option I can switch to. I mean, yes, a big advantage of manual passing is being able to push the ball into a space and chase it to cover more ground than by dribbling. I do it offensively when there's nobody to lay the ball down to, and defensively to get past a player in the back. But over here, and in the previous examples, I really am intentionally passing into an empty space with no players in it. But I'm talking about the engine failing to even switch the cursor when I'm clearly passing to a different player in a very crowded space, and it's not even presenting him as an option to switch to till it's past him. And it not only fails to switch the cursor, but it slows down the intended target, so he's no longer a viable option even if you manually switch to him. Now imagine if that happens when you're passing back to your keeper. I mean, the game's inability to know which player I'm passing to can have disastrous implications online, especially near your end of the pitch. And if you thought that was bad, look at how the engine fails to switch to my keeper when I pass back to him. He just ignores it till it rolls into the net. And it happens over and over, and he's not even presented as an option I can switch to. which means that even if he's literally in the ball's path, he'll be required to take an extra touch, which leads to losing the ball. And even if I underpower the pass to avoid an own goal, it still won't switch to him till he takes a touch he can't afford to take. And if you thought this was specific to manual passing, I've seen it happen while defending, completely unrelated to passing. Like over here, my opponent passes to the left side, but the cursor switches to Alaba all the way on the right, and by the time I switch to Virgil, it's too late.
Oh, he's burnt and the shot.
And here the cursor stays with Alaba instead of immediately switching to Robbo. I'm telling you, the poor player switching is not exclusive to manual passing. But it's not always like that, and more than often, the game will generously switch to the correct player. And when the switching doesn't get in your way, you'll be able to score after stringing together many manual passes from the back all the way up the pitch.
Necessary urgency, but it's potency they need. Number 14. Great pass.
And I'm sure I mentioned that on my Twitter already, but setting aside the horrible player switching, I actually very much prefer the physics of passing in eFootball way more than in PES. And I think the biggest difference is the reduced and more accurate friction physics with the ground, where the ball tends to roll a little longer than it did in PES. And once you get used to the ball rolling a little further than expected, you start truly harnessing the power of manual passing into space and having your players run into that space. When you come to think of it, I think the more subtle change in a spinning ball bounce in eFootball is down to the reduced friction with the ground. It just takes some adjustment when switching to eFootball to make room for the reduced ball friction with your ground passes. But after that adjustment period, you'll be back to pulling off perfectly weighted manual passes between defenders. And I'm not sure how it comes off in this video, but I can tell you that stringing together these short manual passes is extremely satisfying because it feels like you're passing into your player's running momentum. Manual lofted passes are even more satisfying to pull off, especially given how much more difficult they are to properly weight, as they are in real life. And that's the thing about manual controls. They tend to result in the same satisfaction you get in real life when you pull off good passes.
Not far away from being a telling final ball. Napoli clearly should have done.
And while they take a lot of skill to pull off manually, they are mostly effortless but also joyless when you're playing with assists. And yes, unfortunately, every single player I faced online was a fully assisted ping-pong passer, which requires zero skill but also comes with zero joy. There is absolutely no way I'd even consider going back to assisted passing, having gone through the very steep learning curve of manual passing and the even more challenging manual crossing. Manual passing takes maybe a week or two to get used to. As for manual shooting, I recommend watching the FUMA tutorial and last year's video for tips, like shooting into the same direction you're running into. Now with manual controls, you get to choose to pass in front of defenders instead of behind him, which comes in handy way more than you'd expect. And if you combine that with L1 passing, which makes your passer run forward into a more threatening position you can manually pass into, you'll be able to do things like hold up play and wait before manually passing into the space your player ran into. Long, lofted switches of play work just fine in eFootball, although if you remember in PES, you were able to easily lob offensive keepers like Neuer using the manual lob. And even though Neuer ventures just as deep in eFootball, the manual lob isn't able to get it past him. Compare the same attempt in PES, made from further back, and you can see it has way more power compared to eFootball. Using the stunning lofted pass adds more power at the expense of reduced height, so I'm still unable to get past Neuer using the stunning modifier. Speaking of which, I honestly never felt the need to use stunning lofted passes on manual controls, because really, it's all up to how you power and aim the pass. The only thing I miss in terms of lofted passes from my PES days is the ability to perform a short but high floating pass, a useful and rewarding tool to manually bypass defenses, and it's unfortunately missing in eFootball. I mean, you can still pull off lofted passes behind the defense, but you can tell they sat a little higher in PES. Finally, because I get asked that a lot, manual passing is now called Pass Level 4 in the new game. It's pretty challenging of course, but when you miss, it's less frustrating because it's all on you, and your successes are way more rewarding on manual controls. And of course, you gain the flexibility of choosing which spaces behind defenders you can pass into.
Good spot, he's seen the run.
Actually, manual passes might be too liberal, as in being able to execute 180-degree passes, compared to PES, where there's a maximum angle you physically can't pass beyond. That said, this freedom comes with a price of an even steeper learning curve to overcome in eFootball, because this year, you need to manually aim further away from opposition players, especially with an opponent who knows how to use motion matching to intercept your passes. A good example of such an opponent is the Legend AI, who seems to always have it engaged. It took me a decent time to adjust from the lack of motion matching in PES, which made it a lot easier to get around defenses. So I found that this year, you're better served by using a combination of lofted passing and ground passing to reach your target, and I use it primarily to avoid getting intercepted by this year's player matchup while defending. Now, you don't absolutely need to do that, and with proper aiming and powering of your touches into spaces away from opposition players, you can get around them using only ground passes.
Okay, less said about that pass, the better.
But I do recommend you take advantage of the slower power bar fill this year to pull in your players closer and to very lightly lift the ball to avoid interceptions en route to your striker. Now, before I talk about the all-new defending system in eFootball, here's a summary of my thoughts about passing in this game.
Easy to say from up here, I know. It's an early cross. Big chance!
The slower filling meter means short passes are back on the menu.
And he could be in. And the shot!
I very much prefer the overall weight and feel of passing in eFootball, and I can say the same about lofted passing, which also feels great. Manual passing provides the advantage of pulling players into spaces, as well as the ability to pass in front of defenders. And while more animations help release the ball more effectively, there aren't enough animations to deal with an incoming ball at any part of the animation cycle. But the biggest problem with passing, and with this game as a whole, is the disastrous state of player cursor switching, which developers need to address as soon as possible. The game does a horrible job of figuring out which player to switch the cursor to, so it's not unique to passing. It also happens while you're trying to defend opponent passes. And speaking of defending, along with the improved passing and dribbling, the new defending is one of the reasons why I decided to finally uninstall PES. And the lack of motion matching to intercept passes was the first thing I noticed when I briefly went back to playing PES a month after eFootball 1.0 came out. And it drove me crazy in PES, how I did my best to place my player where I would anticipate the ball would be, only to have him completely ignore it and let it pass. And that is pretty much what the new motion matchup button fixes. When you're holding matchup, your player modifies his run to intercept nearby balls, and you can actually use it to steal a ball without using the physical defending button, by holding motion match while an opponent player turns close to you, or by holding motion matching then moving to the player in possession. Now, if you're in a hurry and actually need to get a little more physical to steal the ball, then you can press the physical defending button, which has been needlessly renamed to shoulder barge, even though it's not remotely restricted to that. Going for a shoulder barge without pressing motion match will lead to a poorly timed tackle that might miss the player entirely. But if you have motion matching engaged, your player does a better job finding the ball without taking out the player. I must say, this new defending system was horrible in 0.9. You literally just held motion matching and L2 together, and your player would just run to the ball and steal it, even if you had to shove the player from behind with no consequences at all. But of course, this has been fixed in 1.0, and I'll talk more about that in the refereeing part of this review. Now, given how important the motion matchup button was, I went ahead and had it mapped to the pass button, since it pretty much replaced the classical press button in PES. Speaking of which, it seems that Konami thought that the backlash directed at the 0.9 version was because people wanted the old way of tackling, so they brought classical defending back as an option in the 1.0 game in the form of the press button, which acts the way defending worked in PES. But I think it's the most useless option, results in many fouls, and I've never had to use it since I've switched to motion matchup. And I can tell which players use the classical press online by how poorly timed their tackles are, and I think the faster you move on to the new defending, the better. The reason I strongly recommend using the motion matchup instead is because that way you get to intercept nearby balls, which you don't get to do with the press button. And without motion matching engaged, even if the ball is directly hit at your player, he won't properly trap it. Compare that to how smoothly you intercept the ball while motion matched. As a matter of fact, while you have motion matchup engaged, every player on your team, not just the player you're controlling, becomes ready to intercept a nearby ball, like Thiago here, who steals the ball even though the cursor was on Trent. Motion matching made me want to have better defenders on my team, who can do a better job intercepting plays. Like, notice how much ground Van Dijk is able to cover with his block when I engage motion matching. Motion matching isn't overpowered and won't magically correct your momentum if it carries you past the player in possession. That said, there's plenty of room for improvement. Like, even Virgil will be sent on a poor trajectory behind the striker despite motion matching being engaged the whole time. And sometimes there isn't an available transition animation to take control of a ball passing through your player with motion matching engaged. Konami certainly needs machine learning to fill the inevitable gaps in motion capture. And what I actually hate the most about motion matching is when the blocking animation is way too aggressive for something I have no control over, like sliding to block a shot without me actually pressing the slide command. And yes, this led to way too many penalties that were extremely frustrating to concede. And it can happen no matter how good the defender is.
Oh, he's got that all wrong, and it's a penalty.
So please, Konami, if a motion match defender can't reach the ball to block it, don't have him slide in the box. Because holding down motion match when an opponent is taking a shot isn't considered abuse that should be punished. That said, I love motion matching, but I spent a long time believing I shouldn't need to press a button to engage it, because players in real life don't actively decide to intercept nearby balls as if they had the choice not to. It felt like it should be a logical reflex when the ball is passed nearby. But the more I thought about it, I feel that the player should have the option not to block a shot by not holding down motion matching. Because if your opponents hold it down all the time, it becomes really easy to weave your way through a defense by faking shots. I found that a shot fake results in a more aggressive block if you do it on your dominant foot, and that's actually a nice and realistic touch by the development team. Take a look at the aggressive block animation generated by Firmino's dominant right foot, which he then follows with a beautiful outside curler manual cross, and compare that to the weak reaction evoked by this weaker foot fake online, and you can see how much easier it is for Firmino to quickly recover from the block and then proceed to punish the attempt with a beautiful manual ship of the keeper. When an opponent abuses motion matching the whole time, you can use a fake to create the space needed for a stunning shot. But sometimes, fakes just work without motion matching engaged, and it happens because of the way momentum will carry a sprinting defender forward a few extra steps after the running input has stopped. It's also helped by the fact shot fakes provide an accessible way to pull off sharp turns while sprinting. Firmino here receives the ball a little behind him, but I use a fake to suddenly turn towards the goal. Now, before I discuss the improved dribbling in eFootball, I wanted to talk about the new team press and shielding. So I don't use shielding at all, but some of my opponents online do, and it serves to position the player in possession between the player and an opponent so that a physical tackle would result in a foul even if motion matching was engaged. It's pretty neat if you're willing to compromise your speed to keep the ball or get a free kick. As for team press, it replaces the traditional second defender call in PES 2021, which was particularly useful to apply frontline pressure and steal the ball back in that final third. And that is the only application for team press that I would recommend using it for in eFootball, and the best way to apply it is by letting the second defender rush the player in possession while you try to block his passing lanes, and success rates are actually quite high. But unlike in PES, where you can use it defensively, you really shouldn't use it that way in eFootball. Check out how team press yanks Ronaldo's mark off his trajectory, leaving him free to run at the goal. This option needs to do a better job selecting team press players with less important priorities. So here's a summary of my thoughts about defending. The need to engage motion matching and wait for the right moment before tackling is a huge improvement this year. If you don't use motion matching, your player won't stick his leg at a nearby ball and won't attempt to block across as it zips right past him. Defending will also be hard if you're sprinting the whole time, because you won't be able to adjust your direction fast enough. Actually, you want to make sure you're not playing with an attacking mentality at the time of a kickoff, otherwise your defender moving forward will not be able to keep up with an opposition player running in the opposite direction, which happens due to the unrealistic lack of defender anticipation. But even if you're on a neutral mentality, a pacey forward will overtake your defender even with motion matching engaged. This is known as the kickoff glitch, and it is probably the single most annoying way to concede in eFootball, especially with assisted controls who don't have to aim or power their passes or shots accurately. And it happens right after you've just scored a goal. As a matter of fact, I've been able to manually score a couple of those myself, and you can see how vulnerable a stationary defender is using this exploit. And you can see the importance of adding an element of anticipation to defenders so they do a more effective job tracking players running towards the goal.
Up to now. Well, it hasn't exactly got the plan sorted.
This brings me to eFootball's new momentum-based dribbling, using the tilt-sensitive left analog stick. In PES, I was never really able to burst with a dribble into an open space, and players were easily slowed down with the slightest contact. But in eFootball, I found that I can easily and very smoothly burst into an open space and exploit it, and you can really feel the difference in vulnerability when a team is 2 men down and unable to fill these gaps. Player momentum has been heavily nerfed since the 0.9 days, where Twitter was littered with these videos of players speeding past one player after the other without using skills and only using the new varying speeds of the dribbling, and abusing the fact defenders won't be able to match your changes in momentum. There's no denying that dribbling was super fun in 0.9, but also ridiculously overpowered, especially when you combine it with the use of skills that made all defenders look like toddlers that were too easy to take on. And while the use of skills was sweet to pull off, it was actually too easy that merely changing the direction of your dribble throws out defenders whose momentum took too long to respond to this change in direction. Or you can just modify the tilt of your analog stick to confuse defenders for a fraction of a second that they couldn't afford to lose in 0.9. And if you were disciplined enough not to tilt your analog stick the whole way, you could actually take on several players sprinting towards you, and you can do it even against a legend AI with motion match clearly engaged the whole time. So while this has all been heavily nerfed, good dribblers can still slow down by pulling back on the left analog stick to make sharp turns, and it's a way more sensible middle ground between PES and the 0.9 version. Dribbling in eFootball rewards your soft touches of the analog stick, which triggers finesse dribbling way more intuitively than in PES. And it punishes rash defenders with high-risk tackles that leave them exposed in the back for gaps you can capitalize on. The ability to pull off these tight turns in eFootball is extremely satisfying, and you really do feel a difference when you're maneuvering these spaces with certain players who can execute these tight turns, which used to be way more clunky in PES by comparison. Being able to pull off these tight turns, combined with sprinting defenders taking a little longer to recover, creates realistic goal-scoring opportunities we've never had before, with players who no longer turn like trucks to face the goal, and a skill gap where users can stop and go with highly rated players to invite tackles they can dodge with these lovely little animations. You can still use a combination of skills and momentum dribbling to get around defenders and create the space you need, which is how skills work in real life. And the execution of skills feels very fluid and natural. Some skills are perfect antidotes to motion match defenders lunging at you. There is a decent element of timing involved in successfully pulling off a skill, with most being easier to pull off if you avoid sprinting at the defender, and you'll get rewarded with too much space for a manual player to handle. Although, I still think the rainbow flick is too easy to pull off, even if you need to plan it a little in advance when using it online. But for the most part, and as in real life, instead of skills, you'll learn how to use your player's inertia versus the shifting momentum of other players to get around them and create an opening you can exploit. The fluidity of eFootball starts from the moment a pass is made to your player, with smooth movements to get you around the pitch, like the animation Thiago uses to make the smooth turn while chasing the ball. Then there's the smoother reception animations that build upon your forward momentum instead of interrupting it with players chasing you down.
He's one-on-one! Big chance!
These animations lend themselves to the fluid feel of this year's game. I mean, I used to infrequently see these animations in PES, but they happen a lot more commonly in eFootball. And although it isn't always smooth sailing with long balls, I feel like I trust my higher end players more in eFootball to take control of the ball, smoothly picking up the ball at knee height and carrying it forward without losing speed.
Last man, and the shot!
The importance of noticing your and other players' momentum makes you really think about how you want to receive your passes, like the way Salah takes on two players with his first and second touches of the ball. Now, I don't have many examples for a stunning touch, but you can intuitively pull it off by releasing R2 and holding it down while pushing the ball into a direction for a heavier touch that can open a space up. Or the way Firmino puts the defender in his back with a stunning touch that sets him up for a low drive into the box.
Can he finish?
If you sprint too hard and move beyond the point you are supposed to be optimally at, it slows you down and allows others to catch up with you. But in this play, I stopped sprinting with Robbo, so he's able to continue his run upon receiving the ball in stride. Even with manual controls, if your striker asks for the ball, you don't want to delay the pass for too long, otherwise he loses momentum. Unfortunately, Konami announced an annoying addition to ball trapping this year, which allows you to move your player before he traps the ball without using super cancel. In my opinion, it needs to be smarter or completely scrapped. In this play, I want Ronaldo to perform a first-time manual pass to Salah on the right, so all I need to do is aim to the left and power a pass, right? But watch what happens when I aim towards Salah. Ronaldo gets yanked off his trajectory away from the ball for a bit. So now he needs to take an extra touch to control it, giving the defender a chance to intercept. Also, remember in PES this weird animation that happens when you receive the ball slightly behind you? It was extremely infuriating and very unnecessary, but also very prevalent in the 0.9 game as well. Now in the full release, and to a certain degree, eFootball uses several methods to improve receiving balls behind you, including slowing down the receiver so he's not ahead of the ball, and having the player wait to receive the ball on his other side. That said, the weird animation can still be seen way too frequently in the full release, and it's pretty clear that it's happening due to the lack of machine-learned animations to receive passes, leading to the engine defaulting to this horrible animation when it can't find a more appropriate one. Honestly, I'd prefer if the game just completely removed the animation and allowed the ball to continue rolling behind the player. Now in PES, you were able to use Super Cancel to delay your touch and let the ball roll instead of being slowed down by picking it up early. It was a cumbersome solution, but it worked when I wanted it to. In eFootball, you can still Super Cancel, but an even better move is to just let the ball roll. And you do that this year way more intuitively than any other year, by simply flicking the right stick in the direction you want to follow the roll of the ball into. You don't need a lot of prep time, so long as you flick the stick right before the ball arrives. It quickly became my favorite trick of sorts to pull off in the game, whether it's on the sideline or in the final third where the sudden momentum shift can open up shooting opportunities. And I use it all the time in defense with extra eager frontline pressure. It worked particularly well in eFootball, which isn't really a surprise, given how important player momentum shifts are in this game. And you can tell how much space this simple move immediately gives your player. And even if a player isn't sprinting at you, the head start this move gives you is often enough to give you the advantage. Now, you don't want to do it if your mark already started running in that direction before your player. And of course, if a defender is sprinting at you with no anticipation at all, you'll be long past them by the time they recover. You can use it online with players who aggressively press using team press and a poor understanding of the overhauled player momentum shifts in this game, which could prove lethal in the final third in this year's game.
Delivery from Firmino.
If you noticed in this last play, the more realistic, slower shifting player momentum in eFootball has broken the most improved aspect of PES 2021, which was keeper exits. But before I talk about keepers in eFootball, I wanted to summarize my thoughts about dribbling this year, which is extremely fluid, way more than any other PES release. And that's thanks to the importance of building up momentum and how you can use it to overtake relatively stationary players this year. Finesse dribbling can be triggered mid-run with more subtle tilts of the analog stick, and the more natural animations allow for more maneuverability in tight spaces, along with the ability to execute smooth turns that were previously too clunky. And while players do a better job this year receiving passes in stride, more animations are needed to receive a ball moving behind a player. The new trapping mechanism can mess up with your player's responsiveness, and you get the best outcomes when you pass into a player's run, where a non-anticipating defender will have a very hard time making up ground against a fast player this year.
Can he finish?
One player on the team who definitely can't afford to run without anticipation is the keeper. And that is exactly the problem. And with a complete lack of anticipation, he is always left in the dust with any turn. But it's not only the lack of anticipation to player runs. Here's a legend AI keeper who can't calculate where to run to and ends up missing the ball entirely. I'm not talking about keepers with poor stats. Here's a legend Manuel Neuer, completely missing the ball on his exit. Like honestly, when it comes to exits, keepers might very well be legally blind in eFootball. And believe it or not, keeper exits were even worse in the 0.9 release, and with much simpler balls to clear. But even in the new release, they always exit in a straight line with the same running animations that don't allow for any flexibility. Even if it's clear they won't make it in time. They run in a straight line directed at where the ball will bounce, and not where they will be able to meet it before the striker does. And it's often bad news if the ball bounces before they reach it.
Time left yet. Real chance.
Now, they can make slight modifications to their exit with every bounce of the ball, but that's not a luxury they're afforded at most times they're needed. Also, these modifications happen with literally every bounce, so it's way too slow to be effective. Keepers need to be able to modify their exit trajectories with way more responsiveness than regular players, because they're always trying to anticipate where the ball will end up. The running mechanics of keepers cannot be the same as those of players. I mean, here the keeper pulls off a successful exit, but then returns to the goal with his back to the ball and can't see it whisking right past him. And when they do make it to the ball, they can take their sweet time to actually grab the ball. This part reminds me of how poor the short-range keeper exits were in PES 2020, and how they needlessly caused penalties by running into players instead of honing in on the ball.
Now there's a fine ball. Whistle's gone.
Or jumping way too early for no good reason. Or deciding to tackle my own defender. For all those reasons, and like I used to do in PES 2020, bringing out your keeper halfway and keeping him there has been the most successful policy so far. Outside of keeper exits, the momentum affects some of their ability to react to deflections, especially if the first movement involves some form of motion to the side, although they do great with deflections while they're somewhat stationary. And unlike PES 2020, they will use their hands for deflections off of a player on their team. Outside of the horrible exits, keepers are actually pretty decent this year. They're fast enough on their feet to pull off double saves all the time. They have remarkable reach at close range, and even have superhuman reflexes this year. Like, I'm not exaggerating.
Decent hits.
Especially when paired with much improved anticipation, with keepers sometimes jumping well before a shot is taken. I really have no complaints at all other than the horrible exits, which are a big deal. But having a solid keeper is the earliest and most important investment I made in Dream Team, because as in real life, a last-minute save can make the difference between 3 points and just 1. The physics of fingertip saves are actually satisfying to watch, with the way the ball rolls off their outstretched palms. And equally impressive is this defender's off-ball movement to cover his keeper after a successful exit. But before I talk about the surprisingly incredible off-ball tactical movement in eFootball, let me summarize my thoughts about the keeper in 2 phrases. They turn into headless chicken when you ask them to exit the goal, including short-range exits where they're slow to get to the ball. And now in August, 4 months in, I still have zero trust in my keeper exits. That said, they are superhumanly good when they stay put. But guess who doesn't stay put once your keeper gets hold of the ball? The rest of your players. eFootball's very effective off-ball tactical movement, like the quick counter seen in this example, is surprisingly better than anything Konami put out over the past several years. I say surprisingly because I came into eFootball ready to rip into its lack of tactics, simply because of how hilariously anemic the options were in the 0.9 version compared to eFootball. Player positioning in the 0.9 version was unnaturally uniform, with zero awareness of the opponent's positioning and no options to man mark. The 1.0 version came with the promised individual tactical instructions, like being able to have your defenders take turns tightly marking a certain player, the way Eder Militao picks up Villarreal's striker when Alaba moves away from him, ultimately saving the day. And while it lacks the fancy names of individual instructions in PES 2021, it's more flexible in that you can only choose to have one attacking fullback if you'd rather have your second fullback maintain a more defensive position or to save his stamina for later. And you'll notice that Trent continues to advance towards the penalty area while Robbo stays put, and you do that by giving an offensive instruction for one or both your fullbacks. That makes the player move forward when you take possession, which you can clearly see here with Robbo bursting down the left flank. These kind of instructions allow you to tailor your tactics to the type of players you get on your team, and can completely change the way your team scores most of its goals.
Great work on the overlap. In with a header!
The new tactics did a good job decluttering the mess of tactical options in PES 2021 that made no sense, like being able to select an attack down the center despite having attacking fullbacks, or being able to combine long ball build-up with possession style. In eFootball, your formation, overall tactic, preferred operation zones of your players, and the instructions given to them are what organically determine whether you end up attacking from the side or the center.
Mistakes.
So if I feel I need more presence down the middle, I'll bring on a striker like Firmino, who has a tendency to drop down like a false number 9, who acts as a pivot to relay the ball onto the attacking fullback, then rush back into the box to join the attack. And it all happens organically without needing to apply a false number 9 or a centering targets instruction. Relying on your player's natural tendencies is actually a more realistic way of managing your team's shape the way managers do in real life, and rewards players who think about their players' preferences instead of just selecting the highest rated ones for the lineup. Speaking of the team's shape, your selected playstyle plays a huge role in determining how you advance up the pitch, and again, player tendencies determine how well their off-ball movement aligns with your preferred playstyle. For instance, Salah's preferred playstyle is quick counter, so once ball possession shifts to his team, you can see how efficiently he attacks the open space in the back, knowing he can't be offside before crossing the center. And watch as the defenders keep looking behind them as my defensive midfielder decides to drop back, and watch this defender see an empty spot, which he tries to cover, forcing Salah to cross the ball behind him. Although, because manual passing gives you the advantage of pulling your players away from their marks into spaces in a way assisted controls can't do at all, I've seen manual players use the possession playstyle, which is probably the most difficult yet most rewarding way to play on manual controls, given how risky it is to manually aim even more passes compared to the other playstyles. But I certainly recommend it for really good FUMA players, especially the patient ones who like to take their sweet time constructing plays, and you can see how players present themselves to the ball holder, but also how painfully accurate your aim and power-ups need to be with this playstyle. When I first started playing, I actually went for the long ball tactic, and it worked great with the way your players didn't lose much speed upon receiving the ball in eFootball, but then I shifted to quick counter, because your manual long drives will still draw your players to the ball without losing that explosive forward movement of your midfielders joining the attack. And quick counter is the tactic I would recommend manual players to use even if you like sending long balls down the final third, so long as you have a striker with good heading stats who can act as a pivot, laying it down to the players joining the attack. It's also the tactic where the rapid transition of play is augmented by the ability to manually push the ball into empty spaces, which is an advantage assisted players don't get to enjoy, especially given eFootball's improved off-ball movement of players into the danger zone. And it's not like your players will mindlessly run forward like in PES. Here, you'll see midfielders getting closer and asking for the ball without playing possession. And your strikers will do their best to remain available until an actual running lane is available for them to burst into, with your midfielders joining your strikers in the box. I'm telling you, before playing the 1.0 game, I was prepared to rip into the tactics, but honestly, the explosive counter-attacking movement in eFootball is simply second to none, and you can clearly see how efficiently your players spread into the open spaces to overwhelm your opponent. And I couldn't tell how much better it was till I briefly moved back to PES. I mean, why on earth is Manning moving towards me instead of attacking this empty gap behind the defense? And instruction movement that was already in PES has also improved this year. Check out Robbo, my attacking fullback, as he runs back when possession is lost, then starts running forward to follow his attacking instruction. But then he sees players blocking his path, so he runs around them outside the pitch lines, and I do not remember seeing a player do that last year. But even outside of instructions and playstyles, player movement is just plain smarter. Like, check out Modric, as he noticed Carvajal abandon his position to press forward, leaving a dangerous gap behind him, so Modric immediately runs back to cover Carvajal. And this happens without any instructions and without the playstyle dictating it. Players this year are just better at finding empty spaces and attacking them in a very natural and organic way. So yeah, to sum up my thoughts about tactical movements, not only can you recreate almost all last year's individual instructions, they're actually more palpable and better executed this year. And even outside of the available playstyles, individual player movement like Modric here deciding to attack this corridor is just way smarter, less frustrating, and makes for a fluid game of football.
Modric.
Speaking of fluidity, Konami introduced a new, fast restart this year to shorten interruptions of play like throw-ins and corner kicks in a more natural way. It's pretty sweet when it works as intended, especially if the ball is thrown into your player's arms, but literally any other scenario and it ends up taking way too long to be non-intrusive.
The difference for them. Number 13. Schick. Number 5.
So here the ball is slowly rolled towards Robbo, and he does a clunky animation to pick it up. So if I were Konami, I would eliminate all instances where the ball needs to be picked up, because they are too frustratingly slow.
And the task became too much.
And I'd stick to only having the ball thrown into the player's arms. And don't even have the ball kicked towards the player taking the throw in, because that takes too long. Just have it kicked outside. And even that isn't properly implemented. As you can see, Robbo here kicks the ball towards the goalkeeper taking the goal kick.
How comfortable this team is on the break.
I do love how, with Fast Restart, you get this instant real-time cutscene, where you can see things happening in the background that are actually happening in the real game. And it's actually a great idea that makes cutscenes way more tolerable to watch. The problem is, it takes too long to actually be ready to take the goal kick that even after a corner kick, and by the time you're allowed to take the kick, the other team has completely rebounded to their positions and you can't really counter. Corner kicks are by far the worst offenders. They take way too long that it's really pointless to even have the fast restart option. Ideally, they should be fast enough to allow exciting scenarios like Origi's Champions League 4th remontada goal against Barca at Anfield. But in eFootball, by the time you can actually take the corner kick, your striker has already been surrounded by defenders. Fast restart free kicks are annoying in that it resets all my hard work trying to block passing lanes for no reason at all. It also has its fair share of bugs, like having a player trapped in the net for a good minute, which isn't uncommon. Finally, if you had substitutions planned for the next interruption of play, the referee won't stop the fast restart process to allow it to happen. Speaking of the referee, I would actually count him as another surprise.
Left him in a heap. The referee's awarded a free kick.
Aside from him pointing his arm the wrong side for fouls all the time, over and over again, which is a cosmetic animation thing that doesn't really affect gameplay at all, at his worst, the referee AI in eFootball is just as bad as it was in PES 2021, which is not good. But there are many clear areas of improvement. For example, high impact tackles will warrant a straight red card, and taking out a player away from the action will also earn a straight red, as will tackles that take out a player with the ball slightly away from him. The game really doesn't want you to slide knowing you're not getting the ball, which is great. And I've seen that the referee won't shy away from giving multiple straight reds to the Legend AI for excessively powerful lunges into your player. It actually seems that the AI is actually the worst offender when it comes to high impact tackles. That said, as in last year's game, the referee will wrongfully consider far players that are only theoretically closer to the goal when determining whether or not a red card should be given for a last man tackle. So the last man algorithm really needs to be properly updated. And even though I've seen the keeper get sent off before, it's not consistent even for definitive last man tackles. Penalties are where the biggest improvement is, including tackles that slow your player enough without completely knocking him out. This year, penalties can be given against keepers, and even though you really should almost never slide in the box, except for that one time which was pretty cool, oftentimes even matched-up frontal tackles might trigger penalties, as will seemingly good matched-up tackles where you make slight contact with the player before the ball, and those are very frustrating. Actually, any time contact happens with a player before the ball might lead to penalty. Not to mention tackles that seem to be 100% good. It's frustrating when you work hard to match up and go for a good tackle only to concede a penalty. There are no changes to penalty taking this year, although guessing the correct side doesn't guarantee you'll save it, which sounds more like script to be honest. Your keeper won't jump unless you press the shoot button, which you need to press even if the ball is shot straight at you. Outside the box, advantage play works quite nicely for the most part, which is important, but it's still plagued with the same issues from PES, like the referee awarding an offside instead of a foul when the ball rolls to an offside player after a foul has been committed.
To get himself offside.
Or completely forgetting that an advantage was given even if you don't touch the ball again.
And he could be in. So nearly the perfect.
The referee doesn't do a good job determining when to continue with advantage play. Although that might be understandable when a red card is involved, even though I'd rather have the goal. I'm definitely not a fan of how the referee will interrupt play to give an offside against my opponent, even though I already took possession of the ball, and even if the offside player didn't touch the ball. It's really bad because it often interrupts my quick counter, especially when most of my opponent's team is in my half. And it's made worse by the fact there's no fast restart option with offside. The only time advantage was given with offside was when the keeper got hold of it. That's about it.
Can pick that up.
Of course, nothing changed when it comes to handballs in eFootball. They still don't get called. Not even against the keeper, which happens more frequently than you'd think. Finally, the lack of fouls on collisions remains to be a very difficult issue to fix in eFootball. I've been almost completely desensitized to the issue, just like the referee in this game. Now, this has been a problem since the new collision engine was introduced 3 years ago, and I actually like the new system. But maybe if the game gave players animations to avoid some tackles from happening, this problem wouldn't be as annoying as it currently is. And it's really hard for the engine to detect a collision worthy of a foul without an actual tackle being involved. But believe it or not, even with tackles, sometimes a foul won't be given. But again, the main issue here is calling out collisions that happen because the opponent took you out by merely having their body placed between the ball and the player in possession without going for the ball. Obstruction fouls are pretty contentious in real life, but I think I'm fair to presume these would all be called in real life as fouls. And it's quite important for these fouls to be accurately called out, because of how game-changing free kicks are. Just like the collision logic, very little has changed when it comes to the ease of scoring free kicks this year. That is to say, they're pretty easy to score as long as the connection isn't too laggy. If anything, I'd say it's a little easier to score the hard ones this year compared to PES 2021. Although, I do feel that the window for the second shoot button tap for dipping and knuckle shots has been made a little tighter this year, which is why I only take those dipping shots offline in eFootball. Konami is yet to introduce more variables to make free kicks a little more challenging or unpredictable. Like I said in my PES review, the issue here is the bad keeper positioning, and as you can see in the replay, how late he reacts to the shot despite being poorly placed. I've seen players online try to move the keeper, but if you're fast enough, you'll still be able to score. And honestly, they're too easy that you won't need much time to worry about keeper movement. The physics of the free kicks are solid though, and free kicks remain to be some of the most satisfying goals to score in eFootball. So with most gameplay elements covered, I wanted to briefly talk about the graphical aspect of eFootball. It's no secret that overall, eFootball is a disappointing game to look at, especially after all the hype surrounding the transition to Unreal Engine. Although up close, I actually think eFootball is easily a step up from even modded PES. But we don't stare at cutscenes 99% of the time, and everyone skips pre-match sequences anyway, so who cares about that? It's the gameplay view that interests me, and this really is hit or miss. As a rule, daytime matches are clearly better looking than nighttime matches, and a graphical step up compared to daytime in vanilla PES, but that depends on the stadium and the turf you're playing on. Unfortunately, unlike PES with its beautiful stadium, turf, and broadcast camera mods, eFootball is pretty much unmoddable. To make matters worse, the number of available stadiums is simply unacceptable. Now I know this is a free game, but this is a visual upgrade I would happily pay for. And this alone might be a reason many PES fans on PC are hesitant to make the switch, since I used to have 700 beautiful stadiums with Jeremiah's real-life TV turf to pick from before making the switch to eFootball. So Konami really needs to address that or outsource stadiums to third parties and offer them as downloadable content. And I'm not sure when Konami will realize how big a change editable broadcast cameras will have on the overall look of the game. And while net physics are a clear step up from the 0.9 game, they are nowhere near the level of default net physics in PES 2021. Since we're on the topic of graphics, I don't like how the ugly scoreboard won't fade away to show the action underneath it when it's showing stats or subs. You can see them here fade as they should, but then block the view when a stat is displayed. That said, there is a very welcome softness to the graphics in eFootball version 1, which drastically improves upon the graininess of the 0.9 game thanks to Unreal Engine's subtle depth of field effects. Jeremiah tried to replicate this effect in PES, using a very subtle layer of fog during daytime matches, but it doesn't quite look the same. Also, there's a reason all online games are played at night, and that's because the graphically superior daytime games are so poorly optimized they would introduce even more lag online. Speaking of online, I think it's about time we talk about the game modes available in eFootball. And that's going to be easy because there are just two modes. There's an offline mode that is more like a demo where you get to choose from a handful of teams for short 10-minute exhibition games with 3 difficulty levels to choose from, and then there's the mainly online mode, which is Dream Team. And other than the rampant cheating, which I will talk about, in all honesty, I love it. And that's coming from an exclusively offline player for the past 30 years. When I'm using a wired connection, it's fun, especially knowing that I'm using manual controls, playing almost exclusively against stacked legend teams with full pass and shooting assists engaged. Now, I never played MyClub because I found it too cumbersome to get into, but Madz has an excellent article detailing why Dream Team is so much better than MyClub, and it made me appreciate all the things in Dream Team that I took for granted, like being able to directly buy players. Apparently, you couldn't do that in MyClub. If you wanted Harry Kane, for example, you had to bid for an agent who specializes in Premier League players. Then you had to bid for another agent who specialized in center forwards. Then I don't know, apparently sometimes you need a third agent who specializes in blackball players. And some of these bids took days. Basically, you kept bidding for the right combo of agents to narrow down the odds of landing that player in your spin. Now that is one extremely tedious minigame that has very little to do with football, and is taking way too big a portion of the game to even be a minigame. Obviously, we are playing this game for the football, and I want to get to the football with the players I want as soon as possible. Win enough games, complete enough objectives, and you save up GP that you can use to buy the players you can afford. And that's what I was able to do in eFootball. Oh, and here's another one. The players you get in Dream Team will be yours for a whole year. Apparently in MyClub, the contracts were way too restrictive and took way more GP to renew, so much that you had to field a team of lesser ranked players in AI-controlled sims so you can farm enough GP to actually be able to play with these players you worked so hard to get. Obviously, farming GP by simming games is not the game you signed up to play. In Dream Team, you're able to train the players you bought and boost their playstyle affinities and stats in a very RPG-like way, and it makes Dream Team feel more like an online Master League of sorts. Now, since the game is free, Konami obviously needs a way to make money, and that comes through purchasable coins that you can use to buy legends and spin for players that come in packs as in FIFA. But anyone will tell you that you don't really need to invest real money to build a decent team in eFootball. I personally only invested 99 cents over the past 4 months so I can spin for a powerful striker with good physicality back when I was starting. I really needed a good striker to finish off all the chances I have been manually creating, so I spun in the Great Finishers pack, and I got a Great Finisher. That was the only time I put in real money in the game, and it's probably the last time too, until Konami releases the offline modes, or if Konami makes one single legend I've been waiting years for available in the game. I actually didn't get anything close to a rush when I spent for Ronaldo. It felt dirty if there is a word to describe it. I had way more satisfaction from balancing my budget and directly buying the players I could afford instead of getting a bunch of players I never asked for. This brings me to the giveaway in this review. So for the first time since I started this channel, Konami UK got in touch with me and offered 12,000 coins to either use for my team or to give away on the channel. The 12,000 coins only work for the PS4 version, so I'm giving it out to any subscriber by the end of the weekend who likes this video, leaves any comment, and retweets my post linking to this video. Do that and I'll send you a question on Twitter about that one single legend that I would really want to have in my team. Don't worry, there will be plenty of hints, and after you get this right, and you will, after all, I did feature him on this channel and on Twitter before, the 12,000 coins will be all yours. Another difference outlined in Madz' article is the manager system. Apparently in MyClub, you are limited to the formation and tactics of the manager you signed. Yeah, that's been completely scrapped now. You can choose to play however way you want, but each manager does have a preferred playstyle. And if you choose to play using that playstyle, certain players on your team get more points every match. And you can use these points to boost the stats you care the most about, as well as their playstyle affinity. And while Dream Team is mainly online, it does have an option to play offline with your same Dream Team in 1 or 2 events that are happening year-round. But I would happily fork out the price of a full game in exchange for offline leagues and the edit mode we were promised before. At least the AI will never act like this weirdo here, who kept passing the ball in his penalty box the whole game, even when I'm 3-0 up. But the main reason I would happily play is because the offline AI, and I'm always talking about Legend difficulty in this video, is way more fun to engage with than Legend AI in PES. To describe it in one word, eFootball's Legend AI is sneakier and takes risks in more human ways than any other year. It feels a lot like playing against a human who is just good at the new dribbling mechanics, including proper use of stop-and-go movement. The AI's use of tricks is very logical, and honestly, I don't remember seeing the Legend AI use tricks at all in PES.
It's Parejo!
They do human things like head the ball back to the keeper so he can grab it. They score natural-looking own goals, although this was never a problem in PES. And I've already mentioned how they'll often go for reckless tackles that earn straight reds, which was missing in PES.
He has been given his marching orders.
Defenders are also much smarter than in PES, where I can bait them into turning towards their goal, then quickly run into that direction to steal the ball. I tried to do that in eFootball several times, but the new inertia shift makes that almost impossible, and it only works in eFootball if the needed direction change is subtle enough to get around to the other side of the defender while sprinting. In PES, I always felt the Legend AI can score from anywhere at any time from difficult angles, and they often did. But I almost never get that feeling in eFootball. Legend feels way more fair and fun to play against, and they also have their fair share of horrific misses. But every now and then, they will score from an insanely accurate shot. My biggest issue with AI is the lack of any prediction of a player's trajectory when they're chasing down the ball. As in PES, they still seem to run in a straight line towards the ball even if there's no way they'll make it, opening up an easy path for me directly towards the goal once I reach the ball. On the other hand, when I play online, a human is able to determine that they won't make it to the ball in time, so they'll naturally run away from it while trying to block a low cross to my player in the box. Some online players actually overdo it and end up ruining an offside trap that I can immediately capitalize on. I mean honestly, if it weren't for the minimal lag online, it's more fun playing online than offline. The only thing that would make me play online more often is if Konami allowed me to play other FUMA players to even the odds, because it's been 3 months since the game came out and I am yet to find a single manual player online. Now I'm sure they exist, and some FUMA players even make it all the way to Division 1, and hopefully with a new friend match feature, I can directly connect to these players and play with them. And I really needed that because unfortunately, online lag delaying my input is a huge handicap when playing on full manual controls, and aside from cheating, it is my biggest source of frustration. Now I've been able to reduce lag to a bare minimum by using a wired Ethernet connection instead of Wi-Fi, and it made a significant difference. That said, I still get stutters too often, even on a wired connection with full bars. The problem is, your manual direction input might no longer be valid if lag leads to a player taking an extra touch before making the pass, as the recipient might no longer be in the same spot, and with no assistance to correct the trajectory, you end up losing the ball. It's even worse when shooting. Your direction input is based on when you powered up your shot. If you take an extra touch, the player is usually in a different location relative to the goal, and you might miss the target altogether. Now of course, assisted players don't have to deal with this. They can power whenever and their aim gets corrected when the player actually shoots. No matter how difficult the angle is, they just aim at the goal and press shoot. But when playing manual, I have to actually do my best to aim precisely through that tight gap between the keeper and the post. I generally found that a manual player needs to create at least 5 times as many chances as an assisted player to score the same number of goals. That's how hard manual controls are. But despite the frustrations, again, this isn't the script. This is all on me rushing my aim at the goal. And this is why I eagerly await the time when Konami allows me to filter online players by pass and shot assistance, because having access to consistent online FUMA action in Dream Team would instantly kill every other game I own in my library.
And that is the last effort of the game.
Then there's the way your super cancel input doesn't get through when there's lag, and that's another frustrating issue I've been dealing with. And even though you might no longer be holding sprint, it takes longer for that input change to translate on the screen. But yes, I love Dream Team, or to be clear, I loved Dream Team, until I got exposed to the ugliness that is online cheating on PC and PS4. Because Konami will sometimes use peer-to-peer connections, you become vulnerable to at least 2 hacks that can completely suck the fun out of Dream Team. The first is a website that voids the game's result, and I've seen this happen when I scored the last-minute winner one day. Benjamin here just applied the hack, and just like that, my win didn't count. And like I said, this works on PlayStation 2 by the way. But that's not the worst one, and neither is the hack that gives a team all 100 stats and stamina. The worst hack is actually an EXE that hackers can only activate in the second half, and then you suddenly lose the game 3-0 as if you conceded it. Horrible, absolutely horrible. When you win all your matches 3-0 regardless of how you're actually playing, guess where you end up? Division 1. And indeed, it doesn't take long to figure out on Reddit that the vast majority of Division 1 players are unfortunately cheaters, ruining the game for everyone. There really is no way around it until Konami has enough servers to host games without needing peer-to-peer connections. Konami does say that cheaters are getting promptly banned every week, so hopefully they're all completely banned and not just removed from the ranking. But the cheating has been so rampant online that now there is an eFootball review website where you can review every player you've played with just to be sure he won't be a cheater. It's pretty tedious, and I would have liked such a feature to be built into the game because there's really nothing you can do once the connection has been approved. So to sum up, manual passing has been made even better this year with the improved off-ball movement into spaces, and keepers are great when they don't exit the goal. There is a palpable improvement in animations all around, and eFootball plays a clearly more fluid game that challenges you with a new motion match defending system introduced this year. The new system rewards well-timed physical tackles as well as intricate passing through defenders eager to cut you off. Keeper exits need a lot of work, but there is a solid foundation for Konami to build upon. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. If you tried manual shooting, found it too difficult, and need an in-depth tutorial that also applies to eFootball, watch the 25-minute 25-second mark of last year's Realism review video, which I've linked here, where I will tell you all the tips you need in your journey to becoming a man. You will player. Thank you to all my patrons for supporting me this year. Be sure to like this video and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.